The wind had dropped before dawn. What little breath moved across the scrublands barely stirred the leaves. Dust hung weightless in the air, too still for morning, too quiet for peace. Nothing moved along the old fence line. No birds called from the acacias, no insects warmed their wings, just silence, and then a sound that did not belong. A single, sharp crack, not from branch or hoof, rang once and ended, then again, but farther now. The hush did not return after. The man had been walking the low slope beyond the southern ridge, taking the route he always took to check the empty watering pan and the firebreak path before light rose. He paused mid-step when the sound reached him. He knew what it wasn't. It wasn't a branch breaking under weight. It wasn't a territorial call. It wasn't wind. It was something else. Hollow, fast, almost metallic. He adjusted the sling of his bag over his shoulder and kept moving. He didn't run. There was no point. If it was what he thought it might be, running would only get him there too late, or not late enough. He reached the slope and moved into the valley without speaking. His boots pressed through the dry grass, leaving no sound but the slow break of stems. The light was changing. Not bright yet, but no longer night. The kind of dull gray that painted everything in shades of ash. And then he saw the marks. The grass had been broken in long, uneven swipes. Not scattered, not a herd. Just one. One large animal moving fast, confused, turning once, then again. Just before the small ditch opened ahead of him, he saw the drag. A wide, heavy imprint in the soil where something large had stumbled, then slid. He stepped carefully to the edge and stopped. She lay half buried in the trench, body curved unnaturally, one leg beneath her, the other stretched along the incline. Her side rose and fell, slow but still. Blood trailed from a deep gash high on her flank. Not torn, not scraped, cut clean through. Her eyes were open but dim. She didn't turn her head. She didn't trumpet. She didn't move at all. The man crouched beside her without speaking. For a moment, all he did was look. At her breathing, her chest, the rise of her ribs, the angle of her hips in the soil. He didn't reach for her. Not yet. Her ears twitched once, barely lifting. Not toward him. Toward something behind. Toward where the crack had come from. The man looked up. Nothing in the brush moved. Not yet. He set his bag down and pulled the folded cloth from inside. It was old cotton, soaked the night before in river water. He squeezed it once, then stepped closer. Still, the elephant didn't move, not even her eye. He spoke only once, low and steady. "It's all right, girl." No reply, of course, just the soft rasp of her breath. He pressed the cloth gently along the wound, just to stop the slow flow. She flinched. Not her whole body, just a small shiver along the ridge of her shoulder. Then nothing. He paused, then continued. The bleeding wasn't fast anymore, but it had been. The dust around her was darker in patches, soaked and drying. A few flies hovered but didn't land. He scanned the trees again. No sign of movement, no shape, but he knew what to look for. A footprint where none should be, a broken stalk, a piece of thread. Still nothing. She let out a breath then, long and low, almost a groan. Her trunk stirred and fell again. Her body did not rise. He moved to her front now, just far enough to see her eyes clearly. One was half-lidded, dry around the corners. He pulled a second cloth and used it gently, brushing water across the edge. She didn't react. Her body had gone still in that heavy way animals do when they're past the edge of pain. Not asleep, not unconscious, just somewhere far beyond discomfort. He checked the breath again. Still rising, still falling, slow. He walked a short arc around her body, mapping in his head where he'd build the perimeter. Not a fence. Not that. Just enough fire and smoke to keep predators back in case they'd smelled blood. And poachers, if they decided to return before full light. There was a broken stump nearby, half charred from a dry season burn. He snapped a branch and lit the end. Then another. He built a quiet ring, not too close, not too wide, just enough to mark his presence. He'd done this before, not often, but enough to know when to be visible. She didn't lift her head. Her flank trembled once more, then went still again. He crouched beside her again and opened a small packet from his bag. Crushed leaves soaked in salt water. It wasn't medicine, but it helped. He rubbed it gently into the air above her wound, careful not to press. The scent might dull the flies. The sun crept higher, barely warming the air. And still, she did not rise. The man sat now, cross-legged beside her head, not speaking, not moving. His hand rested lightly on the dirt near her face, never touching unless needed. Her breathing was steady now, if faint. The cloth had stopped the worst of the bleeding, but her eyes remained glassy. A buzzard circled once in the high sky. The man glanced up, then back down again. He would stay. There was no signal this deep in. The others would come eventually when the rounds were missed, but not now, not soon. He shifted once to adjust his spine and winced. His hip cracked softly, the only sound beyond her breath. The dust began to lift around them. Not much, just the soft curl of wind returning. It moved through the grasses like breath, carrying the scent of blood but also something else. Damp cloth, burned wood, old salt, and worry. By midday the sun would be too high. The wound would dry unevenly. Insects would return. And if no help came, he would need to decide whether to risk moving her or wait. But for now, he waited. And she breathed. Just before the shadows shifted for noon, she turned her head, only slightly, and the tip of her trunk moved. Not toward him, toward the ridge. He followed her gaze. Far in the distance, near the break in the tree line, a branch swayed. No wind touched it. He narrowed his eyes. The shape was gone now, if it had been there at all. But something lingered in the air, a tension beneath the silence. She blinked. Her breath hitched, then settled again. The man did not stand. He stayed crouched, eyes on the ridge, hand resting lightly beside her cheek in the dust that smelled of iron, earth, and smoke. The wind rose slightly, and the silence did not return. The air cooled as the sun fell behind the ridge, turning the brushland gray. Shadows spread through the hollow like spilled ink, reaching slowly across the ground until the elephant's body was half swallowed by dark. The man did not speak. He remained seated near her flank, his knees stiff from stillness, hands resting loosely over the worn edge of his bag. The wound had clotted unevenly. Blood had slowed, drying dark against her hide, cracking around the edges where the cloth no longer held. Every so often, he poured a thin trickle of water over the gash, not enough to wake her body, but enough to keep the flies from swarming. She didn't move when he did. She hadn't risen, not once. Her trunk lay curved along the dirt, twitching once an hour, maybe less. Her chest rose and fell. That was all. There was no call, no moan, no trumpet of pain. Only the dull, slow rhythm of trying. He knew that kind of silence, the kind that comes when the body still wants to live, but doesn't ask anymore. By twilight, the fire ring had burned low. He built it back up, not too close, just enough for the smoke to hang in a circle. Bits of dry thorn, bark, and curled grasses crackled low. A few moths fluttered through the heat, then vanished into the dark. The trench she'd fallen into had become a shallow cradle. The weight of her had settled the soil, pressed her body into a bowl of dust and stones. One leg still lay folded beneath her, likely numb now. The other, stretched out, bore the scrape of her fall, a long scuff down to the skin. The man soaked another strip of cloth in the last of the salted water and gently dabbed at the raw edge. She blinked once, slow and heavy, the kind of blink that took effort. He didn't say anything this time. There was nothing new to say. He leaned back on his heels and scanned the tree line again. The horizon was vanishing. No help was coming that night. Not out here. He kept one hand on the small ember pot he'd brought from the western outpost. It glowed faintly through the mesh lid, meant for carrying flame without smoke, but he'd cracked it open now, letting it breathe, feeding it shavings and bark to keep the circle alive. Predators wouldn't come close to it. Not easily. But poachers, that was different. He knew the signs. The clean edge of the wound, the way she'd run, then fallen. And now, the quiet. That kind of damage didn't come from a broken branch or a careless stumble. It came from something aimed, something fast. She didn't tremble anymore. Not from pain, not from cold, just a kind of stillness that had settled into her limbs. A surrender. The stars crept out, one by one. No moon yet. Just the hush of distant insects, a few bats darting low. The man reached into his satchel and pulled out the last of the soaked herbs, a bundle wrapped in dried reed. He cracked it open and rubbed it between his palms, letting the scent rise, bitter and earthy, meant to soothe inflammation. He laid the crushed remnants gently in the shallow edge of her wound, patting it down without pressure. She didn't flinch. She was still warm. Not fevered, not cold, just steady. A jackal cried once in the far distance, then again, closer. The man stood for the first time in hours and stepped toward the fire ring. He tossed a fresh bundle of dry root into the edge of the flame. It flared orange, spit once, and held. Smoke lifted sideways in a slow arc, curling toward the ridge. When he returned to her side, her eyes were closed. Not deeply, not sleep, but a kind of half-rest, half-waiting. He crouched again and rested his hand gently against the earth near her front foot. The pad was cracked with age, but clean. No rot, no spreading wound, just stillness. "Stay with me," he said softly. Her ear shifted once, a single flick, that was all. He stayed like that for another hour, breathing with her, firelight flickering across their bodies, nothing between them but time. By midnight, the wind changed. It swept across the hollow from the east, low and dry, pulling ash across the dirt. The man stood again and moved to reset the circle, tightening the flame where it had drifted. The stars above were sharp now, countless and pale. No clouds, no weather, just still air and silence. She groaned then, not loud, not sharp, just a long, low sound deep in her chest. Her trunk curled faintly toward her body but didn't reach far. He stepped closer again, kneeling near her front leg, watching. The eye opened once more. Just enough, just barely. He could see the effort. She wasn't giving up, but she wasn't ready to rise. He placed a small shallow bowl of water beside her trunk and waited. After a while, the tip of it moved, touched the edge, tipped it over. Not a rejection, not an accident, just the motion of trying. He replaced the bowl without comment. She did not move again. Somewhere behind them, another nightbird called, a single note, then quiet again. The man pulled his coat tighter and sat back against his bag. He didn't sleep. By early dawn, when the first whisper of light began to sketch the trees, the fire was down to coals. He let it go. If the night had passed without threat, the morning would bring no worse. She hadn't risen. She hadn't cried. But she was still breathing. When the sun crested the ridge, a single breeze passed through the hollow. It stirred the tips of the grass, lifted the ash from the fire ring, brushed against her ear, and in that moment she blinked again. Not slow this time. Not shallow. Just once. A steady, waking blink. And he exhaled. The first sign of morning wasn't light. It was movement. Small. Barely there. But enough. The morning came slowly, pressing warmth into the edges of the hollow where the night had left its chill. The grass shimmered with thin dew, though it would burn away soon. Light touched the curled trunk first, a pale shimmer across cracked skin, then slid along the length of her back. The wound, dark and sealed now with dry leaf and blood, pulled tight when she breathed. She hadn't moved in the night, but she had endured it. The man stood a short distance from her, watching from the edge of the slope. His back ached from stillness. His hands smelled of ash and salt. He hadn't spoken since the moon passed. There was nothing more to say. A few birds returned, cautiously, flitting low through the brush. One landed briefly on a nearby branch, turned once, then flew on. Life was returning, but slow, as if uncertain. Then came the sound, a low, distant rumble. Not thunder, not wind. It moved beneath the air, not through it, like something rising from deep earth. The man turned his head toward the sound. It came from the far ridge behind the stands of thorn and firewood trees. He squinted, watching. At first, he saw only the silver-gray shimmer of morning. Then, movement. Not fast, not loud, just a stillness that had shape. At the top of the ridge, 5 elephants stood. Not a herd in motion, not a charge, just standing, side by side, quiet. He watched as one stepped forward, an older female, larger than the rest, her skin dark along the ridges, ears slightly torn. She lifted her head once, trunk extended but did not call. The injured elephant stirred. It was the first time she had moved with intent. Her trunk twitched, then lifted a few inches. Her eye, open now, turned toward the ridge. The man did not speak. He watched. Another rumble came, softer now, almost imperceptible. But she responded. Not with sound, with breath. Her flank trembled faintly and she exhaled. Then her head lifted, just slightly. It wasn't strength, not yet. It was memory. the kind that lives in the body even when the body fails. The matriarch on the ridge took another step forward, then stopped. She did not descend. The others did not move. They waited. The man knew better than to stand between them. He stepped back behind the half-burned stump where he'd lit the fire the night before and crouched low. His presence was no longer the only one that mattered. A gust of warm air rolled over the ridge and swept into the hollow. Dust lifted from the elephant's wound, then settled again. Her trunk stretched a little farther, curling, briefly before dropping back. She didn't try to stand, but she didn't look away. The herd remained in place. They didn't cry out, didn't signal, but they stayed. The matriarch's eyes were fixed downward, not aggressive, not alert, just aware. And below, in the basin of dust and low grass, the wounded elephant blinked again. A little faster this time. The man could feel it, not in the air, but in the ground. A subtle hum beneath his feet, the resonance of something ancient, familiar. He looked down at his hands, streaked with soot and dried balm, and let them fall to his knees. There was no work left for him now, not until she chose. One of the younger elephants took a step forward, then paused when the matriarch shifted her weight. A silent instruction passed between them. Stillness returned. The sun climbed higher, throwing longer shadows toward the hollow. The heat was building. Time was passing. But none of them moved, not even the man. For nearly an hour, nothing changed. And then, slowly, the injured elephant shifted. Her left front leg bent inward, testing the soil beneath. Her head tilted. Her shoulder leaned. Not rising, not yet. Just checking. Just remembering what movement might feel like. The matriarch on the ridge rocked slightly as if echoing the gesture, then stopped. The man swallowed. His mouth was dry, but his eyes were not. Another small movement. The elephant's trunk reached outward, touched the dust, then curled back. She wasn't strong enough yet, but the memory of standing had returned, and she was not alone. The wind changed again. A soft current swept from west to east, brushing through the trees like a quiet breath. A second elephant stepped forward on the ridge, younger, broad-backed. She took 3 slow steps, then stopped beside the matriarch. Her eyes followed the same line down the slope. They didn't come closer. They didn't need to. They had already arrived. The man reached into his pack, pulled out the last of the soaked cloth, and gently pressed it to the edge of the wound again. She didn't flinch. Instead, she turned her head, not away, but toward the ridge. And for the first time since he found her, her eye caught the light. The matriarch lowered her head slightly, ears unfolding. The others behind her stood perfectly still. No threat, no fear, just the presence of elephants who remembered. The man watched as the injured one drew another long breath. A pause followed. No one moved. Then, a single, soft rumble rose from her chest. Not a trumpet, not a call, just a vibration, faint like the air under thunder. The matriarch answered in kind. A low tone, barely audible, carried more in the ground than the wind. And for that moment, everything was still. No chase, no pain, no hunters, just the weight of presence. She blinked again, and the ridge held steady. They did not come all at once. The matriarch moved first, her, steps slow and soundless, deliberate as shifting earth. She took the incline without force, descending the ridge one silent pace at a time. The air was warm now, baked dry by the sun, but the wind had softened again. Dust lifted gently in her wake, catching in the crease of her shoulders, brushing over the curve of her tusks. The injured elephant watched without turning her head. Her chest rose with slow, heavier breaths, nostrils widening once, then closing again. She didn't lift her trunk. She didn't cry out, but she didn't look away. The man stepped back instinctively, retreating toward the edge of the brush where last night's fire had burned to ash. He left his satchel where it was. Nothing in it could match what was coming. The matriarch's ears shifted outward as she neared the hollow, her pace steady, her posture low. She was close enough now to see the wound. Her trunk swayed once beside her knees, then curled upward slowly, scenting the space. Still she made no sound. Behind her, the others followed. 5 elephants moving together, not crowded, not uncertain, just present. One paused beside a tree and waited. Another moved to the left, widening the approach. No one hurried. The matriarch stepped closer until her shadow stretched across the length of the fallen one's side. The tip of her trunk reached forward, hovered in the air above the dust-crusted hide, and then, gently, she touched the wounded elephant's temple. It wasn't a gesture of urgency or command. It wasn't meant to awaken. It was simply touch, a presence beyond distance. Her trunk pressed lightly once, then lingered. The injured elephant blinked. Her eye flickered shut for a breath, then opened again. She didn't flinch. The man had knelt now, a few paces back, lowering himself beside the ash-ringed stump. He didn't move. He barely breathed. Another elephant approached, this one younger, her skin mottled and flaked from age. She didn't step forward until the matriarch shifted slightly to make space. Then she too reached her trunk across the dust and touched the wounded one's shoulder, briefly, then pulled back. The matriarch's trunk now moved downward, brushing the length of the elephant's cheek, pausing where the skin puckered around dried blood. She exhaled softly. It was not a trumpet or a groan, just a low breath, warm and even. The others came now, not in procession, but in rhythm. Each one moved in a quiet arc around the fallen body, creating a loose circle that closed gently with their steps. They did not crowd, they did not speak. One by one, they added their presence, a touch to her side, a trunk across her spine, a nudge of breath behind her ear. And then they stopped. Together, they stood. No motion now, just stillness. The circle was complete. 5 elephants around one, none pressing in, none demanding response. Their bodies formed a kind of barrier, not of defense, but of belonging. A shape made from bone and breath and the memory of movement. Inside the ring, the wounded elephant let out a long breath. Her flank rose higher, then settled. Her trunk curled faintly beneath her jaw. The tips of her ears moved once, brushing the legs beside her. The man watched with eyes that no longer needed to interpret. What happened in that space was not for him to name. He saw how one of the younger bulls placed his front foot carefully beside her outstretched leg, then stilled. How another leaned slightly to shield her from the sun. How the matriarch remained beside her temple, unmoving, as if she could hold time there. For a while, nothing changed. Then, the smallest shift. The injured elephant's head tilted, slowly, not much, but enough that the matriarch moved with her, adjusting her touch, following the arc of her jaw. Another breath followed, then another. Her eye closed again, but not from pain, from ease. A younger female stepped forward now, her ears twitching, and touched her forehead lightly to the wounded one's back. Not for long, just enough to leave heat. A breeze passed through the hollow, lifting dust in a slow spiral before laying it down again. Leaves clicked gently overhead. The sky deepened to a pale blue without cloud. No one broke the circle. The man, still kneeling, lowered his head. His knees had begun to ache from pressure, but he didn't move. The herd's silence spoke louder than any sound could have. There was no panic, no alarm, just presence, so full it made the air feel thick. The injured elephant didn't rise. She hadn't tried yet, but she wasn't alone, and that, for now, was enough. As the sun crept higher, shadows began to shift. The matriarch remained, her trunk still pressed to the side of the elephant's head, unmoving except for the rise and fall of her breath. The circle held, not as a wall, but as a kind of shelter, soft, unshaken, and real. The sun had begun its descent by the time she moved. It wasn't sudden. Nothing about it was. The circle of elephants still stood around her, unmoving except for the occasional shift of weight, a flicked tail, the slow breath that passed between them like a tide. But something had changed. The matriarch had stepped back. Not far, just enough to allow space, not enough to leave her. The man noticed the shift before the motion. He saw it in the way the air paused, in how the young bull to her left lifted his foot, then set it gently down again. It was subtle, like the first gust before a storm. Not threatening, just certain. The wounded elephant bent her front leg slowly, dragging it inward. Her side rolled faintly. Her breath caught, then steadied. The circle did not close in or step away. They simply waited. She tried once, failed. Her shoulder gave and she sank back, not hard, just heavily, as though her body were reminding her it had not forgotten, only needed more time. The matriarch returned to her side and placed her trunk, gently along the back of her neck, just for a moment. Then lifted it again. A few birds darted low across the clearing, startled by nothing. Dust curled around their wings as they disappeared into the brush. Then, she tried again. Her front legs tucked beneath her, her hind legs braced. She shifted, paused, adjusted. Muscles trembled beneath cracked hide. And then, she stood. Not tall, not strong, but upright. For a moment her legs wobbled, unsure of the new weight. Her trunk hung low, swaying with the effort of breath. But she did not fall. She stood. The herd did not trumpet, did not stir. They only stepped forward, one by one, into place beside her. The matriarch moved to her right flank. The younger female pressed in on the left. The others followed in a gentle arc. They did not touch, did not lean. They simply held the space around her. The man, still at the edge of the clearing, rose slowly from where he'd been kneeling. His joints ached from the long stillness, but he didn't notice. He stood there, not speaking, not calling, his body casting a long shadow across the last remnants of his fire ring. She took her first step. It was halting, more sway than stride, but the dust lifted beneath her foot all the same. She paused after, as if surprised by the motion, then took another. The matriarch moved with her. The others followed. They did not rush. The path they chose was not the shortest or the straightest, but it led toward the far edge of the scrub, where tall grasses bent in the rising wind and the ground dipped into a narrow ravine. The sun was low now, brushing gold across the tops of the trees. Light caught in the folds of their skin, painting their backs in a shimmer of ochre and ash. The man stepped back once, just enough to let them pass without shadow. His heart moved with every pace they took. He did not lift his hand, he did not wave. She walked. Her steps were slow, careful, but they carried her, not just out of the hollow, but out of fear, out of stillness, out of the memory of pain. The herd flanked her on every side, not leading, not following, just with her. They reached the tree line as the last warmth touched the earth. The grasses stirred, and a flock of birds lifted briefly from the canopy, then settled again. The matriarch paused first, then the others, and the wounded one, the one who had bled into the dust, who had not cried, who had not called, stopped too. Her trunk lifted once, brushing the leaves above her, then lowered again. They stood there for only a breath, and then one of the young bulls turned his head. He looked back, not long, not as a question, just long enough to mark the space, then turned forward again. The herd moved into the scrub, silent, slow, without urgency. The man remained where he was. The dust behind them had already begun to settle. Their prints, wide and deep, pressed into the soft earth, formed a trail that curved gently away from the clearing, a path not of escape, but of return. He did not follow. His eyes lingered on the place where she had lain, where blood had dried, where cloth had fallen loose. The stump still stood, blackened and cracked, its surface warm from the day. He walked to it, crouched and gathered the empty water bowl and the last torn strip of reed. Folded them quietly. No words, no farewell. Only the soft sound of his breath in the silence they left behind. A breeze moved through the hollow, stirring the grasses once more. The herd was gone, but the dust still held the shape of their feet.